Romans chapter 6, verse 15 through 23. Paul writes that he's using an example from everyday life to illustrate a philosophically complicated idea. And that's what a good teacher does. The problem is that the basic, everyday, banal, mundane concept he's using to build a bridge to the mysteries of God is slavery. For us here living in modern America, slavery, not really helpful. In the Roman Empire, in the time of Paul, slavery was ubiquitous. Slaves were common, they did almost all the manual labor and all the work. It would be like cell phones or cars for us. Everyone's got them, it's everywhere, it's part of your daily life. But for us culturally, historically, we are nowhere near slavery. It's utterly alien to us. Furthermore, because of the sordid past of our country, African slavery, civil war, racism, slavery is just icky and gross. And so we have no immediate experience of slavery. It's been abolished in America. And whatever we do think of slavery from a distance is morally awful. So, what we need to do is discover what slavery meant to Paul and his readers and his context. And then we can build a bridge to this theological concept once we recapture what Paul had in mind when he wrote about this. Um, Slavery in the Roman Empire was not racialized in the way that it was during the antebellum South. Before the Civil War, in the Roman Empire, a slave was owned by a master, and it was generally lifelong. And there were different kinds of slavery. The best sort of slave was to be a domestic slave of a rich household with a kind and just master. They were there. Now you're still a slave, but you could basically live the life of a CEO of a large estate. You dressed reasonably well, you lived in comfort, you ate well, you operated with a degree of independence and respect. You got an education, math, reading, accounting in order to be a good CEO of a large state, and you even had some leisure time. The worst was to be a slave in a mine or a quarry. You spend all day in hard labor, often underground, digging for metal. It's a death sentence. You're dead in a couple years. Actually, a real death sentence would be better. It's faster. Being a slave in a mine or quarry is a slow, agonizing death. There's a whole range of kinds of slavery in the Roman Empire. There's another type of slave called a nexum. In our modern imagination, we have no category for this. In the Roman Empire, let's say you're a free person, but the problem is you're in massive debt financially. So what can you do? You offer yourself to a master of your own free will to be a slave. You choose to give up your freedom to be a slave. Paul in this passage writes a lot about choice, kind of like a nexum. He says you choose to offer yourself to be a slave to sin. And if you do, you are obeying sin as your master. Or you can choose to offer yourself to be a slave to righteousness. If you do, then you're obeying God. You're either a slave to sin or you're a slave to God. You have a choice in this matter. And the choice you make will determine every aspect of your life. And by the way, there's no third option. There's no choice to be free and independent. You're either serving God or serving Satan. And there is no third option. If you choose to be a slave to sin, it leads to ever increasing wickedness. If you choose to be a slave to righteousness, it leads to ever increasing holiness. It's like a choice that iterates and intensifies. You become increasingly more holy or increasingly more wicked, depending on who your master is. I think we sin because we want to be free from God, church, repression, morality, our family, our background, all the rules that keep us from being who we want to be, all the things that hold us back. And then so we commit a small sin, and that leads to greater sin, and so on and so on. Sin never stays contained. It gets more intensified. It iterates. It increases in capacity and power, and so on and so on. And so very soon, what you did as an act of freedom and independence and liberation, it turns on you. Sin which promised freedom betrays you. And you find that sin didn't free you from constraints. Instead, you are a slave to sin, a slave to your own desires. Again, there's no such thing as freedom. Offer yourself as a slave to God, or offer yourself as a slave to Satan. Those are the only two choices. I want to end with another Bible passage from the Old Testament about slavery. Exodus 21, verses 1 through 6. In the interest of time and interest in general, I want to paraphrase. It's about laws regarding slavery. Moses commands that when you buy a Hebrew slave, he, that slave, shall serve 6 years. And in the 7th year, he shall go out free, for nothing is free. He gets his freedom for free. But if the slave says, I love my master and I will not go out free, then his master brings him to God, and his master will pierce his ear, and as a sign, he shall be a slave forever to that master. I would like you to imagine that there's this person out there. He is so good, kind, wise, noble, generous, and powerful. And you go to him and you offer yourself to him. And you say to this good and powerful man, this holy man, I am yours forever. I'm giving myself to you. I will serve you because I love you. Please, I ask you, take care of me, guide me, teach me, love me, and protect me. Would you take me in as one of your own? We don't have to imagine. That's our God.